As we get more advanced as lifters, it becomes more important to work on little refinement movements and specific heads and angles of muscles. Hey everybody, I thought I would chat with you guys and gals a little bit about this today. So when I say this, I'm talking about purely for like aesthetics and bodybuilding purposes. I'm not saying this is always necessary for, a very recreational lifter who's not chasing certain physique goals, or they're not going to really get lean enough to even notice these things. Probably doesn't matter as much, and definitely not as big of a deal for the novice lifter. And that's because for most novices, they can pick about 5 or 6 exercises, big movements, really excel at them. I like to throw barbell curls in for novices a lot of times also, instead of just only big movements. Sometimes a little arm work, unless they're doing a lot of chins, or maybe a little delt work. Sometimes I'll throw a little bit of refinement stuff in for them as clients. But by and large, really novice lifters should be focusing on their big movements and maybe, like one or so smaller muscles or movements, again, like a barbell curl, right? I'd love to do that for a lot of them, focus on, squat, bench, deadlift, and either pull-ups or rows. But throw some barbell curls in, right? Just to give them a little bit of arm because, most guys want a little bit more bicep, and it's not going to hurt at all to get started on it early. Otherwise you end up like me to where your arms are lagging behind and you play catch up because I did so much strength training. So the thing is with that, they don't need all of these things. They don't need it as much. But what ends up happening is we get more advanced, recovery, strength, these things, they don't scale always the way that we would like. A lot of times people are like, well, your recovery should scale. If your work capacity goes up and strength goes up, you should be able to do the same volume with the same amount of intensity relative to your strength. Well, unfortunately, that's not the case. So what we start finding, the more advanced you get, it gets harder to just build your legs with back squats. It gets a lot harder to build your chest with nothing but flat bench. Mainly because the reps you're doing with the weights that you're using, it can become a recovery issue, right? It can become a recovery issue over time. So we still want to keep those big movements in, right? We still want to bench press. We still want to squat. We still want to do those things, but we may be doing them with less total, sets per week. For example, for me, as a pretty advanced lifter, I only do about 3 sets of bench press a week. Okay, that's it. How many novices out there are doing 10 sets? Tons of them. I do other stuff. I do incline, I do pullovers, all these things. Like you see me doing the pullovers here. I do other stuff to help build my chest because I'm not wanting to just beat myself up with those big movements, because even my 10 and 12 rep sets, at a certain point, they're exceeding way more than the 1 rep max on the bar that novices are going to be doing, right? Most guys at 6 months of lifting can't do my 12 rep sets for a single rep. But as you get more advanced, you do run into these problems, and then you start finding more deficiencies in your physique. Because what ends up happening invariably, yes, the bench press works the entire chest. If you perform it correctly, it works the entire chest top to bottom. Absolutely. But it doesn't necessarily get all the muscle fibers. And we know this from different studies, looking at regional hypertrophy. Certain movements are going to cause more proximal or distal hypertrophy on the same muscle, even though in theory they should be using the same fibers. The hypertrophy can vary a little bit throughout the muscle. So it makes sense that, hey, maybe some guys are going to need some more upper chest. Same thing, we start talking curls and stuff. Barbell curls, great exercise. Works 2 out of the 3 functions of the bicep. You see what I'm saying there? So maybe it makes sense to, as you get more advanced, maybe adding a preacher curl for lower biceps, or incline curl that might hit the upper a little more. Or if you're really trying to get that rotation of the wrist, the dumbbells like you saw me doing there, it can make sense to do that if you're trying to really develop your biceps a lot. Now, is that necessarily going to matter in your first year of training? Probably not. You're probably not going to see any real difference. A good simple barbell curl like I'm doing right here will get you a long way. Get you a real long way. But you get more advanced, you're going to need more. Same thing with triceps. The bench press actually is a decent tricep builder for the lateral head. It doesn't work the long head very well. It grows a little bit in the studies, but not maximally. You may want to do some extensions, or you might need a couple types of extensions. Okay, you might need a couple types. Again, start talking shoulders. Overhead press is not going to build massive shoulders for most people. It's not. It's going to build good front delts. For some novices who are built a certain way, they'll get some side delt out of it up to a point, then they'll just kind of stop growing because it just doesn't hit them hard enough directly. So it makes sense at a certain point to say, hey, look, we might need some lateral raises. We might need more extra rear delt work. Like you see me even doing these band pull-aparts at the end, the end of a shoulder day, right? Why? Working that rear delt with a nice little small refinement movement, right? We're making sure that rear delt gets finished because maybe it's not getting enough from our pull-ups and rows. And I would venture to say that for guys who are chasing a certain look, it doesn't. Because, look at me, like my rear delts need work. You can tell there. They need work, just like my arms do. But I have an enormous back. Like everyone says, your lats are my best body part. Well, most lat movements do work the posterior delts, but mine haven't built in proportion. So, it makes sense that, hey, at a certain point, sure, I can knock out sets of 10 all day long with 45 pounds on the chin up. And I weigh over 200 pounds. Do it all day long. I do pretty good on weighted pull-ups, pretty strong on rows. It does build the rear delts, but is it building it enough to be in proportion? In my case, I don't think that it is. And I would venture to say for a lot of people, it's not. Once you get to a certain threshold, it makes sense to say, hey, maybe my rear delts need some extra work. Maybe the long head of my tricep needs some extra work. Maybe my upper pecs need work. Maybe my lower hamstrings need work. Maybe squats and deadlifts aren't doing enough for my calves. I might need to do some calf raises. And you might have to look and say, well, which part of my calf is deficient? Is it the gastrocnemius or the soleus? Do I need more standing work? Do I need more seated work? These are the things that we need to look at, right? And I have my own weaknesses right now that you guys can see here that I'm working on them actively, because we're all going to have them. The guys who don't have weaknesses in their physique are the guys who are winning major bodybuilding contests. For the rest of us, we're all going to have some weak links. And it makes sense to step back and say, do I need a little bit of refinement work? And I'm talking real refinement, like literally band pull-aparts for the rear delts. And that's not just doing some shoulder work. We're not getting very specific. We're getting a little simple. Same thing with those curls. Instead of just doing a normal supine curl, at that point I'm actually working on supination and pronation of the wrist. Making sure I'm getting those very last deepest muscle fibers in the bicep by hitting that last function that might be missing from the other stuff. And that's what I'm talking about with refinement work. But when you still have a ton of muscle left to build as a novice, obviously it doesn't make sense to work on those things because most of your big movements will grow most of it. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.